Very warm welcome to F18, a question and answer session, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the person who will be answering the questions, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Vince Cable. Let's move that for you. Well, welcome to this Q&A session. We've had an awful lot of questions in, Vince, to you. You'll be pleased to hear. And the way we're going to run this is I will tell Vince the question. He's not had advanced sight of the exact wording that we're going to be asking him and the issues that are raised, so it will come as something as a surprise to him. We will then have the opportunity to have a supplementary question from the questioner over there at the intervention microphone just right in front of me. And then, when Vince has dealt with any supplementary, we'll open it up to all of you. There are roving microphones around the room. I'll invite you to put your hand up if you want to ask anything on the same topic that the first question was on. We'll pick some people out, and then Vince can answer those questions. Well, firstly, Vince, welcome. How are you finding conference so far?
Yeah, great. Great atmosphere. I think it's the biggest we've ever had, but certainly very close to it, and a great buzz.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Well, let's move on without any further delay to our first questioner, and it's Councillor Mo Sakib from Sutton. So, Mo, if you want to ask a supplementary, would you go over to the intervention microphone? And the question is this. It's on local authority funding, in fact. Councils are struggling for funds, regardless of party control. Can the parliamentary party use the upcoming budget and urge ministers to stop these cuts? Vince.
Well, first of all, Sutton, one of our great long-standing councils, doing fantastic work on recycling, redeveloping a massive cancer complex. I mean, if you want to see good local government, go and have a look at Sutton. But in terms of the overall financing arrangements, I mean, obviously part of it has to do with central government. My borough has just come back under Lib Dem control, and one of the first things they've discovered is that there's something called negative rate support grant. In other words, the council now has to pay a tax to central government, gets no subsidy whatever. And this is utterly ridiculous and damaging local services and making a complete nonsense of local government. But there is another side to this as well. There is good local government and bad local government. And most of you who are standing in elections next year will be standing against Tory county councils, quite a lot of whom are now going literally bankrupt. And I don't think we should be letting them off the hook. I mean, some of them have dug their own graves. I mean, what has happened in some areas is, in order to get cheap short-term popularity, they've been freezing council tax. Now, council tax isn't a great tax. It certainly should be reformed, but it is the base of revenue in local government. And councils have been depriving themselves of revenue and inflicting serious cuts, unnecessary cuts on their local population. The other thing about what councils can do for themselves is I spend a lot of my time going round local government, and I see good Lib Dem councils in action. Places like Eastleigh, South Somerset, Eastbourne, which keep getting re-elected election after election. And one of the reasons they do it is they keep up good local services and they generate additional sources of income. They show real entrepreneurial talent. And one of the simple ways of doing it, which I've seen a lot in Eastleigh, and I'm sure happens in other places, is they actually get out and build houses, and then they generate a stream of rent. Or they do commercial development, sensible commercial development, and generate an income. And the Tory councils very often have sat back and done nothing, and then cut their council tax, and now they're appealing for more money. So, don't let them off the hook.
Thank you very much. Mo, would you like to ask a follow-up question to that?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Vince. Councillor Mo Sakib from Sutton. So you touched on the fact that this is an issue right across the country, regardless of which party controls the council. In Sutton, we were getting a government grant of £450 per resident. That is falling to £170, but this is affecting Labour councils, Tory councils, and obviously Lib Dem councils. And as for my question, we've got the autumn budget coming up, and we really need to make the case to ministers that councils are at breaking point. So it would be great to get a sense of what cross-party work is happening with the parliamentary party, with Labour and Tory MPs, to make that case to ministers that councils are at breaking point. We do need more funding. The cuts have got to stop. So it'd be great to get a sense of what the parliamentary party is doing with MPs of other parties as well.
Thank you, Mo.
Thank you.
Well, it's good to have a cross-party spirit occasionally, but don't be too generous to Labour and Tory councils. Some of them are very badly run, and you shouldn't let them off the hook. But one of the points I will be making in the budget is that we should be allowing local authorities to borrow to invest, and particularly borrowing to build houses. It's absolutely ridiculous that they've been deprived of this. So yeah, I will be campaigning with other people to get more funding for local government and to stop negative rate support grants, but we must point the finger where you've got incompetent councillors as well.
Thank you. Are there any questions anybody would like to ask? Short questions on local authority finance? Just raise your hand. We've got microphones coming round. Yes, there's a gentleman just over there. If you'd like to stand up, sir, there'll be a microphone coming round to you very shortly. Just there, the gentleman standing up in the...
I think I've got a microphone here, so...
Great, okay, well, I'll take you first, then I'll take that gentleman just over there on the left-hand side, who's just waving at the moment, who I'm looking at just right now. I'll take you next. Thank you.
I'd just like to pick up on the point about investing in commercial development. I mean, that always strikes me as a somewhat odd thing for a council to be doing. It doesn't seem as if it's the correct job of a council to raise revenue from its ratepayers and then effectively speculate with that revenue. I just wondered if you'd like to say something more about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think there's a difference between councils investing prudently in development in their own communities and investing in commercial property at the other end of the country, which is what some councils do, and I would certainly draw the line at that. Probably if I just make one final point, that when we're campaigning about local taxation, I mean, we know that business rates are actually not a local tax, they're a national tax which councils collect. But I think we should hammer the point that one of the things we're keen to do as a party is to scrap the business rate system altogether, which is very, very damaging for local small business. And you will see the documents as we debate them during the week. We've now got a well thought through plan for replacing business rates with a tax based on the underlying value of the land, which is an enormous improvement, particularly for the relatively deprived communities of north of England and elsewhere.
Thank you. Now, there's a gentleman over there who I just wanted to make sure had a microphone. He does. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure. Is it working?
Yes, it certainly is.
Thank you. My name's Martin Pennington. I chair a town council in Westgate-on-Sea in Kent, which is a lovely part of the world. Unfortunately, it lies within the remit of Thanet District Council, which until recently was the only district council in the country run by UKIP. The party effectively fell apart, but the area has suffered from decades of mismanagement as a district council by Tory and Labour administrations. We were set up as a local town council only in 2015 as a result of a referendum. In the motion that was passed yesterday, we referred to encouraging the establishment of parish and town councils. I think it would be good to evolve some thinking on this. The referendum that was held with us was very poorly supported, but I do believe that Lib Dems through the country should be supporting not only the establishment of parish and town councils, but also their strengthening.
Thank you.
And indeed to improve the whole compliance and accountability system.
Yeah, thank you. Well, parish and town councils, thank you. Vince, parish and town council.
Yes, I mean, one of our basic elements of our philosophy is to distribute power as far as possible and to decentralise power as far as possible. And quite a few in this hall do their political work at town council level. It's very important. And I think even within the big councils, which we've had successes with, I remember Liverpool in the past, it's happening now in Kingston and elsewhere, is that within the council areas, localities are given much more discretion over spending and planning decisions. And in this way, we actually get power into local communities. And that's something that I think is very distinct to our way of doing things.
Thank you, Vince. We're going to move on to a totally different topic now. And the topic is health and social care. And our questioner is Councillor Dr. Wendy Taylor. So if she'd like to go over to the intervention microphone, if she'd like to ask a supplementary. The question is, Vince, the crisis in the NHS and social care is getting worse. Why are Liberal Democrats nationally not campaigning harder on this issue?
Well, I'm disappointed that you haven't heard our policy on this, because we do talk about it. We have a very distinct and I think popular policy, which has several elements to it, which is, first of all, we say we should, in all honesty, raise taxes, a penny in the pound on income tax, raise something of the order of 6 billion as an immediate injection of cash into the NHS and social care. Secondly, we have a proposal for an earmark tax, which in a way takes the NHS out of the annual bun fight over funding. This is something we've argued about for years. It's now been endorsed by people, somebody I fought for 5 years in the coalition government, the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury, who is, and people like this accept that this is the only way in which the NHS can be protected from the endless buffeting of politics. So we create an earmark tax based on reform of national insurance. And I think if people want to go back and check what we've said about it, Norman Lamb set up a very good commission, some top people from health to advise us on this a year or so ago. It's all down there, how we propose to deal with it. So I hope we'll effectively campaign on it.
Thank you. Wendy.
Yes, I'm not saying we don't have the right policies, and there was a lot about it in the election last year, but I don't really think I've heard very much since. And the crisis is getting worse, in particular adult social care. I mean, most councils are struggling to think how they're going to cope. Workforce problems, lack of GPs, lack of staff to actually run our care homes and our domestic care, lack of nurses, and yet there doesn't be anything recent to try and get public opinion behind us for our very good policies.
Thank you.
Yes, just to make one point. Of course, money is important. I don't want to underestimate that. But don't forget that a lot of the damage that's now being done in the health and social care sector has been done by Brexit. I mean, my local district general hospital, I went to see the chief executive a couple of weeks ago. They're now on a risk register because of the large-scale emigration of European nurses who've going back home, and they're desperately short of staff. The whole framework of cooperation of health is at risk, particularly if we get into a no-deal Brexit arrangement. So let's remember there's a different dimension to this, and not just cash.
Thank you. Would anyone like to ask Vince any questions about health and social care? Put your hands right up. Yes, there's somebody just over on the left-hand side of the auditorium to my right, just over there. The steward's coming over to you. Yes, sir. Would you mind standing up and telling us who you are and what your question is?
I'm Ross Pepper from Sleaford North Hykeham. I just want to say I'm delighted to be here after a health scare in April left me in hospital. After something that actually could have been picked up long before. I just really wanted to ask, should we be looking to move to a preventative system of healthcare where we are actually kind of go for a checkup more regularly, and should that be our focus going into healthcare rather than a reactive system? Should we be kind of pushing our energy towards that rather than the healthcare system we have at the moment?
Thank you.
No, you're right. And that should be very much at the centre of our thinking. There are parts of the country where this is already happening. I went campaigning in Hazel Grove recently, and under the health reforms that are happening in Greater Manchester, in Stockport, you know, they have this preventive system. If people come, elderly people come with routine conditions, they're given a voucher to enable them to do work in an allotment, to get, you know, social activity, and in this way keep them healthier. I mean, there is a lot of work potentially can be done which actually keeps people out of the health system altogether.
Thank you. There's someone there with their hand up in the middle of the row. Would you mind standing up, please? Yes, there we are. You and Madam, and we'll have the microphone passed over to you, please, and you can ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Claire. I'm a counsellor in Wiltshire, and I work the rest of the time for the NHS. My question really is, well, I know that the problem that we see in the NHS every day is the root cause exists in social care, without wanting to put blame in the system. And if we could do something to get social care right, I think that the investment into the NHS would not be potentially wasted on people that are just not flowing through the system properly. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a question that's captured the imagination of many people. Health
No,
is social
you're
care.
absolutely right. I mean, there used to be crude words to describe this problem, which was, you know, bed blocking. I think it's now got a more politically correct label to it. But, you know, there are large numbers of elderly people in hospital who simply shouldn't be there. And they're stuck there because their discharge is delayed. And it's delayed because the local council isn't able to provide the social care support that they need. And if we get that right, and if local authorities can be supported in proper social care arrangement, then you take an enormous pressure off hospitals.
Yeah, thank you. There was somebody in the same block just there with his hand up. Would you mind standing up, sir? You had your hand up right from the offset. So if you'd like to ask your question, please, then I'm going to move on.
Yeah, Michael Taylor from Calderdale. Vince, I know that as an economist, you really know that hypothecated taxes are a bad idea. And I think we'd be much more honest to say to people, we're going to spend out of taxation for the health and social care that's necessary, because that would be the honest thing. But to pretend that there's a hypothecated tax when everybody knows that tax is fungible is frankly not the best way forward.
Yes, well, this may not be a question of pure economics. We're dealing with politics here, and we're dealing with people's willingness to pay taxes. And there clearly is a mood, which we are all familiar with, that people are much more willing to pay taxes for things that they can identify with. And the NHS is clearly one of them. Actually, we are being honest about tax, and we're saying people should pay more, and that is the argument for a penny in the pound on income tax, in order to provide an immediate injection of cash. But if you're dealing with deeper-rooted problems, you need a guaranteed, predictable source of income. And a reformed system of national insurance is one of the ways in which you could do this. And it's not perfect, but you know, at the very least, it creates a secure framework within which the NHS can plan and not live from hand to mouth.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to something very different, and our third questioner is Sarah Lewis from Lambeth. And her question is about cross-party cooperation. Vince, your own borough party showed the benefits of working with other parties by coordinating with the Greens. Should other local parties like ours do the same? And Sarah, if you'd like to ask a supplementary, then the intervention microphone is the place to do it. Thank you.
Well, my simple answer is it depends on your local circumstances, but in principle, I think we should be working with people who also have our values and progressive views. Let me just say a little bit about what happened locally in my party. I was rung 3 years ago by Caroline Lucas, who told me she wanted to withdraw her candidate from the Richmond by-election in order to help us win it from Zach Goldsmith, and did so, and we won. We then lost the rematch in the general election, not because of the Greens, who again withheld the candidate, but because the Corbynites went out and determinedly campaigned to get the seat back into Tory hands. So that was our experience of dealing with so-called progressive parties. Now, I felt it was appropriate to reciprocate the gesture that the Green leader had offered me, and I encouraged my local party to have an electoral arrangement with the Greens in Twickenham and Richmond. And it was actually quite securely based, because in the general election, the Green candidate in Twickenham, didn't just stand aside, but actually came out and campaigned with me. And when you have that goodwill and common values, it seems sensible to cooperate. So my local party agreed an electoral arrangement. We allocated some seats and multi-member wards to the Greens, and partly as a consequence, we had a landslide. The Lib Dems are now firmly in control of the council. The Greens got 6 councillors. Now, of course, people turn around to me and say, you were too generous. Why have you given them these seats? We could have won anyway. Maybe, I don't know. None of us know what would have happened. But it was a genuine cooperation with people who share not identical, but very similar approaches to policy, and it worked. Now, I'm not saying that works everywhere. Maybe you have a history of antagonism, I don't know, and it's not for me to tell you what to do. All I can say is that from my experience, there are a lot of people, certainly in that party, possibly elsewhere, who we can work with and should work with, not just on Brexit, which of course we do, but on other issues too. The one thing I would caution against is trying to strike electoral deals with parties who are hostile to our values. I won't name names, but I was recently ambushed in a television interview by people who said, well, why is your little council in Little Tuddlebury, or wherever it was, in an alliance with UKIP? I pleaded ignorance, but we need to be careful about all this. You make your decisions based on local circumstances, but I say my experience has been a positive one, and I encourage it.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like to ask a follow-up question? No, I see waving hand. No, that's not going to be pursued. Would anybody else like to ask anything at all about working with other parties and the approach that should be adopted in particular areas? Anybody at all? Wave your hand if there is. Yes, there's somebody there in the blue. Yes. Thank you, sir. If you wouldn't mind standing up and asking your question. Thank you.
Rob Chicken from West Berkshire. My question is, it sounds a little bit dangerous, but there's been sort of some muttering because you mentioned the Greens, and so often what the Greens are trying to do is very similar to what the Liberal Democrats are trying to do. And it was suggested by somebody that maybe we should look in the future of merging the two parties. And I just wondered if that chat has happened elsewhere, and if there's any thought on that subject.
No, it's not on the agenda. It's an issue for local parties. But I would stress to you, you've all seen that, Monty Python sketch, the People's Liberation Front of Judea fighting the Judean Liberation Front. There are places where we have what's called the narcissism of small differences, and we're fighting over minor issues. Where we do have things in common with other people and common values, for goodness sake, let's cooperate.
Thank you. There's a gentleman there in the middle with a microphone, and somebody else is waving frantically over on the very far right of the auditorium. So you'll be our last questioner on this issue, sir. And you with the microphone over there, sir, if you wouldn't mind asking your question. Oh, I think we'd better get the level up on that microphone, if that's all right.
Simon Quayle, Horsham.
That's better.
I think that under the last coalition government, Nick Clegg did well. He was unfairly punished in the subsequent election. With the febrile political climate coming up, who knows what might happen? Would you think of going into coalition with either Labour or Conservative again to get back into some form of government?
Well, the simple answer is no. I mean, I think we all know the reason why. I mean, whatever the history of Labour and Conservative parties, and whatever they may be like in decades to come, at the moment, the dividing line between where they are and where we are is absolutely enormous. And it's primarily on the issue of the day, which is Brexit, but is on a whole host of other issues where you have a very right-wing, authoritarian Conservative Party, and that's even ignoring the extremes. And you have, and you have the Labour Party, which is in this absolutely appalling state where even many of its own MPs disown it. So there is absolutely no prospect in which I would consider that we could enter into a coalition of the kind that we had in the aftermath of the financial crisis.
Thank you. And our last questioner on this, yes, you, sir.
Recently you described our party's position or its policies, or both, using the word central, which leaves me very uneasy. Would it not be better to use the word radical?
All right.
Well, as I said at the rally yesterday, there are a lot of words that we're all groping for, you know, radical, progressive, moderate, central, whatever. I'm not arguing about words. I mean, the central point is that our values are actually quite different, and they're not in the middle. And if you run through them, you know, the approach to environmental issues, this isn't a right-left issue which you divide down the middle. If you talk about civil liberties, if you talk about the commitment to social justice, above all, if we talk about Brexit, we're not halfway between the other lot. I'm very happy to be associated with the word radical and with progressive, whatever you want to call it. So let's not argue about words. I think we know what we are.
Thank you. Well, I'm afraid I might confound you ever so slightly with the next question, because the gentleman over there had amazing foresight, because our next question's on very similar issues to that. It's from Linda Jack from Bedford. So if Linda, if you're here, if you wouldn't mind going over to the intervention microphone. The question is, moderate or radical, how will you marry the two?
Well, I think I've answered that. So, Linda, yes. You tell me where I was wrong.
All right. Well, far be it from Linda to do anything like that. Linda's just going over to the intervention microphone, where she'll have the opportunity to ask a supplementary. And in the meantime, if all of you in the hall wouldn't mind thinking of any follow-up questions that you'd like to ask on this. In the meantime, I'll invite Linda to ask her follow-up question.
Yeah, I guess this was prompted by the reaction to your use of the word moderate, Vince, on Facebook, where there were so many posts saying I'm not a moderate. And I think my concern and the reason for asking the question isn't just about semantics, it's about who are the people, we're opening our arms to everybody, who are the people that we want and what do they stand for, because I'm very worried that we may lose sight of those very clear values that we express in the preamble to our Constitution.
No, we should keep in mind, absolutely at the forefront of our mind, the values which are reflected in our Constitution. But it is hardly a great secret that there are large numbers of people in the Labour Party who would normally describe themselves as Social Democrat, and which was part of the origins of our party, who say they can no longer live with the party they're in. There are large numbers of Conservatives who are, they would call themselves liberal, who can no longer live with the kind of Conservative party that they're in. And I see nothing wrong with working with them and attracting them, electorally and as part of our wider support base.
Thank you. Is there anybody who would like to ask anything about moderate, radical, or some such? Yes, Liz.
Thank you. It's similar to a question I asked in consultation yesterday. Yes, we're all in favour of people joining the Liberal Democrats if they share our principles and our ideals. But the announcements that you made before the conference led me to believe that you were talking about more of a movement and getting rid of the party. and even actually talking about no longer having the name Liberal Democrat. I want some assurance that that's not going to happen, because my fear is if we do open up and pass all the suggestions that you've come up with, that we will end up with somebody like Chuka Umunna or somebody joining the party and then leading this new movement, and the Liberal Democrats will be dead.
Well, Liz, we had this argument yesterday, and I think you're getting way, way ahead of what I'm actually proposing. I've never suggested changing the name. I'm perfectly happy with Liberal Democrats. If you all want to change it, well, that's up to you, but I'm perfectly happy with it. I mean, there is this kind of thought experiment going on, I think, with some, you know, this idea that if we have a wider concept of leader, is that people are thinking of the person they hate most and saying, if they were the leader, I couldn't possibly put up with it. I mean, look, you're way ahead of the game. There is no leadership election in prospect, except in the longer term. We have very good MPs. I see nothing wrong with opening up the talent pool and looking at people who share our values. It may be that the party rejects them, maybe they don't get through the nomination process, maybe they don't get through the Star Chamber interrogation process, but at least not rule things out as from first principles, because we can think of somebody who we distrust who might get through it hypothetically. That seems to be completely the wrong way of looking at it. In a Liberal Party, surely we're open to choice, looking at possibilities.
Are there any other questions anybody would like to ask? Yes, there's somebody just in the middle here in the blue shirt. Just wait for the microphone to come along the row. Yes.
Thank you. Me again, Sir Vince, I'm afraid. Roger Watts from Warsaw. Do you think as a party we are too nice and not ambitious enough? We've got a terrible situation in this country where people like Boris Johnson, the poor man's Donald Trump, is attracting publicity. We have Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's attracting publicity, his company that he set up is investing heavily in Russia. It's the UK's economy that we should be backing, not Russia's economy. So are we being too nice?
Are we being too
nice?
Well, I
think probably it is a temperamental failure that we all have as a party. And I think Jo Swinson put it very well when she was speaking here before lunch, that within the coalition we could have been nastier and more aggressive and defended our corner better. And I think that is a good collective criticism. But I think that, you know, the best way to deal with the Trumps and the Rees-Mogg is not to imitate them. God forbid that we should engage in that kind of crude gutter populism. You know, a part of our appeal is that, you know, we refute that kind of simple-minded approach to politics which looks for scapegoats, looks for simple answers to complicated problems. And it may be that as a result of that, we don't seem to make it as much noise. But actually, we shouldn't be betraying our values simply to make a big noise.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, gentleman there in the same block with his hand up. Yes.
Dennis Loretto.
No, you're okay. We can hear
Dennis
you.
Loretto from Southwark. Thinking about this issue of getting a wider support group from the kind of people who feel they do not actually want to belong to the party, which I think is what it's all about, certainly not abolishing the party. Thinking about it, do we not need to act fairly quickly on this? It seemed to me at the meeting yesterday and everything else I've seen, there's a broad feel that we do need to do something like this, but the devil will be in the detail. If we take too long over this, the window of opportunity when we were going still towards Brexit, where we are in the news sort of thing, might go. And if we mess around and say, oh, sometime next year, I think that we should work towards a special conference, and I would suggest that special conference should not be beyond the end of October.
All right, thank you.
Well, I don't want to rehearse all the arguments we had yesterday. I mean, you've put the case very eloquently and very simply. I think these are good proposals. Other people want more ambitious stuff. Others want less ambitious things. We've got to talk it through. I think your introductory comment that the devil is in the detail, and it's all the more reason for not getting the detail wrong.
Thank you. Let's now move on from some of the party reform debates to something that's much more wider-ranging. And our next questioner is Ian Stotesbury from Watford. So if he's here and would like to ask a supplementary question, would he please go over to the intervention microphone? And his question is this. It's about the tone of politics, really. As the level of debate drops, how do we safeguard and promote science and innovation? What campaigns will you champion, Vince?
Well, I think the first answer is, like the answer to so many questions at the moment, is around Brexit. You know, there is potentially an enormous amount of damage is going to be done to universities and research institutions by the loss of funding, you know, Horizon 2020, and by the fact that scientists will no longer be allowed to move around freely. I mean, scientific collaboration involves that kind of freedom, and we're in danger of losing it. And one of the casualties, if Brexit happens, and if we retreat into, you know, parochial nationalism, is that the science base will be severely damaged. The second point I would make about it, there is a question of priorities, and one of the things I'm proud of in my own role in government, in having fought for and obtained a lot more resources than the Tories were willing to agree to for scientific research and innovation. And I think there are people here who work in the Catapult network that I set up, which has established you know, major innovation centres for the key technologies, medical, advanced manufacturing, space, future of cancer research, personalised medicine, new forms of battery technology. I mean, these are functioning around the country, and it was as a result of Liberal Democrats in government fighting to the resources to make them work. And that legacy, you know, is something we've got to fight to keep.
Thank you. Yes, would you like to ask a... thank you. Ian, would you like to ask a supplementary question arising out of that?
Yeah, thank you, Vince. I think that's perfectly aligned with where we as ALDES, the Association of Engineers and Scientists, see it. I guess my question is, either way, if Brexit does or doesn't happen, we're going to have a plan in place. But I think the scale that we need to put in place, if Brexit does sadly go ahead, to decentralise and actually create jobs right up and down the country where we're struggling, might need to be severe. You know, are we going to start laying out what that might look like to really hammer home what Brexit means for science and innovation?
Well, I hope you will, but let me just say one thing, having overseen this policy for 5 years. Actually, pure science is something Britain's very good at. You know, we produce far in excess of our population as a proportion of the world, reviewed scientific articles, major scientific ideas, Nobel Prizes, and the rest of it. What we're very bad at, compared with many other developed countries, is turning these scientific ideas into practical, business-applied technologies. We lag far behind Germany and the rest of it. And that's partly why we brought in this Catapult network. And we've got to get this rebalanced to make science something that serves economy and society much more effective than it does at the moment.
Thank you. Are there any questions that anybody would like to ask around the science and technology? Yes, there's a lady right in the very front, on the very front row. Thank you.
Hi, Madeline Gowers from Southwark. I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying about universities and institutions and ask how the Lib Dems plan to protect EU tuition fees after Brexit.
Thank you.
Well, if Brexit doesn't happen, which is, of course, what we're planning, then the arrangements won't change. But if Brexit did happen, European students would pay the same charges as other overseas students, which are a great deal more than the charges paid to British students. I think, you know, actually I think it would be prohibitive. You'd get virtually no European students coming to Britain. So, you know, the simple answer is, you know, if you're worried about that, stop Brexit happening.
There's a lady there in a light blue top. Yes.
Antonia Harrison, Havant. I took my daughter to Utrecht in Holland 2 weeks ago. She will be spending her Erasmus year there in her third year of university. As it stands, she is one of the last year of UK students to enjoy an Erasmus year. My son would like to go in 3 years. Is there any chance he will be able to go on Erasmus?
Well, there are several different ways in which Brexit is going to destroy some of the scientific cooperation we currently get. One of them is the Big Horizon project for joint research projects. Another is Galileo. You've heard of the Galileo project. And another is Erasmus, which is the sharing of students' experiences. And if Brexit happens, they will all go. They will all go, and it will be an absolutely enormous loss.
Let's take a couple more questions. Yes, there's somebody right at the very back, just up there. Yes, standing up just now. Wait for the microphone to be passed up. Yes.
Thank you. I was a British rep for the cancer programme at the EU and sharing what probably some of you know as the Cochrane collaboration, data and research. Britain has no idea, the people in Britain has no idea what we are going to lose in not being able to remain in Europe as part of that programme. And it's in all our interests, not just for cancer, because the Cochrane collaboration has the same process for all of the major illnesses, including prevention of those illnesses. I'm in the process of just finishing a book which explains all of this, but in a jolly way, in the sense of I've made it into a kind of romantic novel along with a travelogue, to try and capture people's attention, because we are losing millions of pounds. Worse than that, we have lost and will lose all our participation in clinical trials around the world. We share this data. We share it across Europe, and we share it across the world. And we will lose that, particularly the pan-European part.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a very powerful contribution. Just to add one point on health and Brexit, I think one of the things many of us take for granted at the moment is that when you go to Europe on holiday or on business, you have a little pink card where your health is guaranteed if something goes badly wrong. We have a reciprocal arrangement. If we have a bad Brexit, a no-deal Brexit, of course, all that goes. Things that we've all taken for granted, whether we're medics or not, are going to lose something that is, really valuable for our lives.
Yes, there's someone here on the front row, hand up in the red. Yes.
Alison Willott in Monmouthshire. Sorry to mention Brexit. We are all of us campaigning frightfully for a people's vote. I'd just like to check on some of the practicalities. What is the parliamentary timetable involved in getting a people's vote? And if there is a people's vote and we do vote to stay in, is it absolutely guaranteed? Because there does appear to be some doubt about it, that the EU would in fact let us, if we did that, stay in on the current terms.
All right, thank you.
Well, there is a timetabling issue, but it's not as formidable as the obstructionist claim. Let's remember that the world's largest bank was nationalised in a few weeks. The older people in the audience may remember a terrible episode. We've just been discussing immigration here. I remember the period when my late wife's family was stripped of their citizenship in a piece of legislation that went through in a week. And when people say now, this is going to take months and months to get through Parliament, they're misleading you. it could be done very quickly. But I think we do need to start thinking about the modalities of a referendum, because it isn't just a question of having a vote. I mean, we will want to ensure that 16, 17-year-olds have a vote. We want to ensure that expatriates who were deprived of their vote last time do have a vote.
Thank you. Anybody else on the topic of Brexit, science, technology, and the like? Yes. Somebody over there with their hand up. Yes, you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Francis from Lambeth. I want to ask a question. Today, those young people are coming out from secondary school, waiting to go to university, and most of the job that they used to do is going to the shop and serving people. And right now we see so many machineries going to the shops, and there's nothing for them to do. So what are you planning for them?
Jobs and automation and doing young people out of work when they leave school.
Well, I'm going to be talking a lot about this in a couple of days' time when I speak to you again. But I think one of the things which has been appallingly neglected, you know, we talk a lot about universities, but actually is vocational education, and particularly adult lifelong learning. I mean, I recently met the people who run the Workers' Education Association, which has been around for decades, you know, helping working people, you know, learn in later life, including adapting, developing a new skill when their existing skill has been made redundant by technology change. And they've had their budget cut by 50%. Yeah, and it reflects an appalling kind of short-sightedness and lack of priorities. So, you know, in a phrase, I mean, it's a complicated problem, but in a phrase, you know, lots of investment in training, retraining, lifelong learning. You can't stop the technology, but you can help the people through it.
Thank you. If there's one more quick question on science, innovation, Brexit-related issues, we'll take that. Yes, there is. It's that gentleman just there in the blue. Yes.
I'll try to be as quick as I can. My name is Clive Lever, and I promise you that is the only reference I will make to the B word, because I'm not that kind of lever.
No.
There is a growing concern among particularly blind and partially sighted people, but also other people with mobility impairments, that a lot of the technologies which we're getting on board with, everybody is getting on board with, not just the party, have to be got right in order that our towns and our streets don't become no-go areas for people who struggle with mobility. For example, quiet cars, the silent cars, we're going to be getting sound generators, but they have to be right first time. Driverless vehicles, to make sure that if you call up a taxi and it's driverless, you'll be able to find it if you can't see it. What is the party going to do to make sure that technologies like that and other technologies such as telecare, when they are introduced, are inclusive and right first time for all, rather than just the technologically smartest amongst us?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
No, you're right, and having a sensitivity to disability and the challenges it presents is absolutely fundamental to a civilized society. As it happens, the example you give is one I had to deal with in government, because I was promoting driverless cars and promoting electric vehicles at the same time, and somebody came up with the problem that if you have a completely silent electric vehicle, how are badly sighted people going to be aware of the dangers? And I think one of the provisions that we brought into the regulation governing these vehicles is that they should have a sound which can be heard by people who are partially sighted. You know, it doesn't require a great deal of adaptation. It's a small additional cost on the vehicle makers, and it's far outweighed by the compensating for the potential damage to the mobility of people with blindness. But yeah, I'm aware of the problem. You know, we all have a duty to think about people who find these a challenge. But there are ways of dealing with it.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to our last question, I think, and our questioner is going to be Martha Vickers from Newbury. So if she wants to ask a follow-up, would she please go to the intervention microphone? And it's this: is it time for all MPs who care about the consequences of Brexit to put country before party and form a government of national unity?
Yeah. Well, it sounds wonderful at having a government of national unity, everybody loving each other, but you know, let's get real. The divisions between ourselves, the hard Brexiteers on the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, are so severe. I mean, there is no way in the real world that we could ever work in the same government. What we can do, and are doing, and should do, is working with people in other parties who share our approach to this problem. You know, there is a growing constituency in both parties, major parties, in favour of a people's vote. You probably saw that Mayor Khan came out this morning. Last week, the TUC, Francis O'Grady. I have been around the country speaking to rallies with Tory MPs, Sari Wollaston, Philippe Lee. You know, there is a growing army of people who are coming out, and we should work with them. And I like working with them. They're like-minded people. But we shouldn't be seduced, I think, into the belief that there's some easy solution that all the parties get round the table together and produce some ideal Brexit that everybody's happy with. I mean, I'm afraid there are fundamentally different views about it, and we can't compromise in that way.
Martha, what would you like to ask as a follow-up?
Well, my question was basically, as Vince has said, it wasn't about all the parties getting together, it was the individuals within these different parties, and we know there are individuals in all the parties that are not happy with what's happening and with the stance of their leaders, and that they should get together and make this a more prominent movement. I know there's obviously conversations going underneath, but I'm not saying all the parties work together, but like-minded individuals. And you've more or less said that's sort of what's happening, that maybe it should be something sort of stronger and more visible. I'd just like to hear what other people think. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to come in and ask anything about that? Yes, there's someone there, gentleman in the front block, just there with his hand up.
Thank you. John Cameron, is this idea that the anti-Brexit people and the left of the Tory party and anti-Brexit in the Labour Party could form a party and then work with us? It's not our job to merge with them, it's their job to merge with us. We've had this before. They can join us. But can we form some sort of anti-Brexit movement from that? I know, I gather you were having talks on this in Parliament. Now, never mind what people say about it should have been somewhere else. Parliament's a very busy place with votes and talks going on all the time. They shouldn't have made an issue of it, but is that a possibility?
All right, thank you. Vince?
Well, there's a lot of sensible, grown-up conversations taking place in the House of Commons and probably even more in the House of Lords, where we have a lot more peers than we have MPs. And I want that to encourage, to flourish. But it is not based around the idea that we come together at the end of all this and form a common party. If they want to join us, well, that's welcome. And if they want to collaborate with us in a separate entity, that is also something we can do. But I think there's a danger in this discussion, as in some of the interventions earlier, of getting far ahead of where we actually are. But yes, we must collaborate to stop this Brexit. That's the bottom line.
Thank you very much. Well, we pretty much run out of time, I'm afraid, but I'm going to abuse the chair very briefly to ask a quick question of my own, and it's something that I was reading. I was hearing that there might be some more books coming out from you, Vince. Yeah. Is that right? And if so, what can we... There was a lady over there promoting her book. Is there anything you'd like to promote to us?
Well, one of the worst things about this job is that I'm reduced to reading books rather than writing them, but I've got several in the pipeline whenever I get time to do it. There is a sequel to my novel, and hopefully something serious about economic policy. But, you know, I love books, reading and writing them, and it's a large part of my life. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I join you all, invite you all to join me in thanking Vince? Thank you to all of our questioners. My apologies to those we couldn't call, and I'll now hand the chair over for the next session. Thank you very much indeed.